Okay, so we're going to start now, I think. We've got a few people in the room, which is wonderful to see. So welcome to this conversation about the diversity gap as part of Leeds Digital Festival. We're really excited to be here online. We were hoping to be in Leeds, but obviously people are still a little nervous about going. I was going to say a little nervous about going to Leeds. I don't know if people are specifically nervous about going to Leeds or just nervous about going to a real event. But anyway, we decided to do it all online so as many people could come as possible. Anyway, so thank you all for coming. We're really excited to share our thoughts, but also we want this to be as much of a conversation as possible. So as we're chatting, please put questions, as many questions as you like in the chat, and we'll either answer them throughout as we're chatting, or we'll address them at the end. And so, because I think what we'd love to do, and we were chatting the other day, what we would love to be able to do is to give kind of practical advice and thoughts around kind of how you can embrace this sort of a diverse working team and create an inclusive environment and so on. So those things are things that people don't always understand how to kind of make the most of, and the panel here have a huge amount of experience in doing that. So that if you have specific questions or specific things that you want to talk about, then we would love to kind of help out on those. So thank you all for coming. First thing I'm going to do is we'll do a quick round robin and introduce everybody on the panel, and then we'll get started with some kind of chat. So I'm going to just go round and I'll just nominate some names so that you guys can do a little intro. So I'll start with you, Annette.
I knew you were going to say that. Hi, everyone. My name's Annette Joseph. I am founder and CEO of Diverse and Equal. So we believe that digital transformation is nothing without diversity. And so we work with organizations to help them to create fully inclusive cultures where everybody can thrive. And we also retrain talented people from underrepresented backgrounds and retrain them for crucial roles in tech. Do you want me to talk about the research now, or do you want to come back to that?
Can we come back to that in a minute? I'm going to give you a chance to do that in a second, if that's okay. Thanks, Annette. So, Efwa?
Hello, I'm Efwa Okumini, and I am the head of training and tech at Coding Black Females. What we do there is we try and encourage more Black women into programming roles through putting on events, mentorship programs, and recruitment programs and training.
Amazing.
I think that's it.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's so much. I always feel really inadequate when people do their intros. Thank you, everyone. Let's go to Randeep next.
Hello, my name's Randeep Sudo. So I'm a product and AI specialist. So I build both products and tech AI, primarily in healthcare. So my background is I worked for quite a few years at a company called Babylon Health, which is the UK's largest GP surgery, running healthcare both in the UK as the largest GP surgery and also abroad. So one of the big projects I did was setting up healthcare in Rwanda, where we rolled out AI and health tech to those at the bottom of the pyramid. And my focus is primarily on making business success while including inclusivity and diversity, not making it an add-on as a separate thing. So that worked really successfully at Babylon. And the more interesting thing I did for the last year was I was invited by the NHS to build the NHS COVID-19 app. So I spent 11 months building what was responsible for the pingdemic, which I'm sure many people will hate, but it was actually quite an interesting project in both building tech quickly, building AI quickly, but building it in an inclusive way so that as many people as possible in the UK could take advantage of the protected benefits. So that's what I'll be talking about.
Randy, thank you. Can I just, before I move on to Jamie, just a little message for everybody in the room. If you could, I mean, I don't mind you putting your cameras on if you want to, but if you keep your mics off so that if there's any background noise, it doesn't kind of interrupt the chat, if that's okay. So last and definitely not least is my good friend Jamie Barrell, who's joined us. I'll hand over to you to introduce yourself.
Thank you. So hi everyone, my name is Jamie Barrell and I'm part of the learning and talent development team at Publicis Sapient, and we do digital business transformation. And I'm also the global co-lead for Egalite, which is Publicis Group's LGBTQ+ network. So thanks everyone, and looking forward to the chat.
Fabulous, thanks Jamie. And I'll just introduce myself. My name is Jamie, but I'm going to be referred to as JJ for today, just to sort of avoid the confusion. I'm a Chief Creative Officer and co-founder of an agency called Equator. We're a digital transformation agency employing circa 150 people in Glasgow and London. And I also sit on the Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Council at BEMA, the British Interactive Media Association. And that role is all about trying to set a better standard for the digital sector in terms of diversity, equity and inclusion through a kind of push-pull sort of strategy, really. So looking at ways of encouraging people to make a change, looking at toolkits to allow people to make a change easily, and looking at incentives for celebrating successful, movement towards a more diverse and more inclusive environment. As we all know, the digital sector is sort of problematic in terms of diversity, equity and inclusion because it's primarily or vastly made up, like the creative sector in the UK as well, it's vastly made up of small and medium sized enterprises. And the challenge there, as I've sort of had first-hand experience of, is as you're growing a business, you're mostly thinking about survival and not having an HR team or even what kind of people you might be hiring. It's just about kind of hand-to-mouth kind of thinking. And what I'm hoping we can do today is to show those types of businesses that this conversation around diversity, equity, which is about not just equality, but kind of supporting people who are under-supported, and inclusion is not something that is expensive or complicated to do. And it is something that represents a competitive advantage if you do it. The stats on that are actually very, very clear. I was reading a McKinsey report just the other day that suggests that companies that have a diverse workforce are 20% more innovative, and creative than those that don't. And I think it's really interesting to think about what that means, what the effect on the people working for your business is when you build that kind of environment. So we want to kind of make that as real as possible today and really kind of get into the, if you like, the nitty-gritty around all of those things. I think it's important to recognise, however, that whilst it's something that doesn't necessarily need to cost a lot of money or even take a lot of time, it isn't a simple change that people need to make or people need to consider. There are complex issues in there, complex issues around culture, around career progression and all of those sorts of things. So we're really keen to kind of get into the meat and potatoes of those conversations. So I'm going to start off with giving the floor to Annette to talk about that complexity and the challenge, if you like, of moving toward a more diverse, equitable and inclusive environment within businesses, because she's done a large amount of research on the topic, and hopefully you're all signed up to go to her talk tomorrow to hear more detail. Over to you, Annette.
Thank you. Yes, so we have been working on a piece of research for Leeds, looking at racial diversity in the tech sector in Leeds. And I'm going to be presenting tomorrow, but some of the outputs from that research, we identified 4 main themes. Those were around culture, around perception, around representation, and around power. So as JJ mentioned, looking at diversity, especially racial diversity, because it's not something that people are very comfortable talking about. You can speak about gender, you can speak about sexuality even, and people tend to be okay with that situation or tend to be all right with that conversation. But when race or ethnicity is mentioned, there tends to be a little bit of a pushback, and there are lots of different factors that go into that. So as we mentioned, it's a complex. It's a complex situation, but fixing it actually isn't complicated. It's actually quite simple. And tomorrow I will have like lots of tips and tricks, and not even tricks, but recommendations on how to create a fully inclusive environment for race and ethnicity, which is the only special characteristic that crosses all other special characteristics. So if you fix it for that, you pretty much guaranteed to fix it for every special characteristic.
Fabulous. So Randy, did you want to jump in? I thought it looked like you wanted to say something.
I know, I was just nodding in agreement, but I was going to say that the key point is, so I'm gay, and I've often noticed the conversations about race. There's quite a lot of discomfort when we come to those conversations, and often the thing I find quite interesting is, I don't believe anyone actively wants to be racist or discriminatory, but one of the worst things you can ever be called is a racist. Even Trump refused to be called a racist, no matter what he said and what he did. The worst thing possible is to be defined or called a racist. But I think inside that, some of that fragility, often we kind of sometimes don't have uncomfortable conversations. So I'm hoping that this room will be quite a good opportunity to talk about certain terms and certain conversations. And I can just bring, when working within test and trace primarily, we had lots of quite difficult conversations with senior stakeholders, because everyone wanted to be on the right side of history, but maybe certain people didn't feel either comfortable or somehow empowered enough to make those changes. So for example, how do you launch a product? How do you test a product? How do you get feedback? Those are things that were quite relevant conversations that sometimes people were scared to have. So I think that's something that I'd like to just to mention, but I'm sure others have interesting points as well.
I think that's brilliant, Randy. That's really cool. I mean, I actually really want to talk. I really want you to talk a little bit. Maybe we'll come back to it about bias in technology and AI, because I feel like that's one of the issues that's sort of tangential to some extent to this, about how we think about creating systems that are equitable as well.
So bias basically happens when a system, deliberately or otherwise, has some level of discrimination built in against women, against people of color, against LGBT. What's interesting is a bit, I think, like was already been discussed by Annette, actually fixing it is quite straightforward. It's all about getting people of diverse backgrounds and diverse thinking in the room. So what you can often have is, there's a big difference between visual diversity and actual diversity. And you see that in certain organizations where you have often brown faces or black faces, but often that come from a very similar social background. Some research that was done by, I'm going to forget the term, one of the headhunters showed that of all the CEOs and board level people that were black or brown, 2/3 of them were not British born, which is absolutely fine, but it means that the representative experiences of those people who are making decisions are not necessarily experiences maybe myself and Annette or myself and F were, because they're not British born and often come from the upper or middle classes of whatever country they're from. Mm-hmm. So there's an interesting experience here about the people. So when you have visual diversity, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the same as a lived experience. And when it comes to building tech, having people in the room who've got lived experience means that you've got those kind of, I build product and AI. Bias happens when you forget, for example, that not everyone speaks English, or everyone's English isn't at the same level, or certain terms may not, for a medical context, like in Rwanda, an example of having depression means you present as having a headache that doesn't go away. Unless you've met someone who's got a background or has a way of speaking to that community to understand that, your systems will be biased against depression because we won't pick that up. So I think representation is important to reduce bias. And there's some techniques we can come to later about fixing that.
That's amazing. Oh God, we could talk about that all day. Jamie, do you want to come in on this? I think there's obviously a lot of work that you do within the organizations that you work in about like addressing those, if you like, systemic challenges around this topic.
Yeah, and I think we've spoken about this before. It's really great when organizations make that investment with regards to diversity and inclusion. But if they aren't maintaining that culture, then, and we spoke about this before, those people might not stay. So you might, create those diversity roles and bring in a really diverse workforce. But if the culture is not fit for them to stay or for them to thrive, and to, the policies aren't there for women with regards to maternity leave, then they're just not going to want to stay. And I think that ends up emptying out that diversity from the organization. And I think it's something that we definitely need to focus on more, because you can bring them in, but you might not keep them. And I think that's really, really crucial and important.
I mean, that's, yeah, absolutely. And I think that as somebody who runs a business and has discovered that a business generates its own culture if you don't sort of direct it. I was reading about culture recently, and it was in one of those business books where you can get the whole book really from the blurb on the back. And the one line was a line that said, if you want to change the culture, you have to change the leadership. And I think that that's really interesting, especially for small and medium-sized organizations, because a lot of what we're talking about is cultural within an organization. So you can create as many rules as you want, but if the leadership is not on board or committed to, I don't know, inclusive language, for example, then the change won't really stick, if you like. And there's a lot of research talking around inclusive boards, exec teams, and I believe that they are 25% more successful than non-diverse exec boards. So there is again a business benefit to kind of to sort of generating that diversity, if not just acceptance of that sort of cultural need, if you like, within the business. But to your point, Jamie, and I was going to just go to Efo on this, I think one of the things we talked about the other day was we think about diversity really about being about recruitment, like making sure that we recruit all different types of people, right? It's not as simple as that, because you can recruit those people, but if you do not have an inclusive culture, those people will not stay. And we were talking about that, and Efo brought up the point the other day about, how do we create an inclusive environment that makes, excuse me, I drank too much coffee, makes those people want to stay as well as join. Efo, have you got some thoughts on that one?
Yes, yeah, that is what we talked about, and I think it goes back to the point that you made about the leadership team. One of the things that can help in creating those environments and helping those people to stay is having that kind of representation, and those people making the decisions about the company, about the future, more representative of the kind of people you want to hire. And just to touch on the recruitment, I mean, I think this has been said a number of times, and there's research everywhere, but one of the things, as my background is in software development, so I've been a software developer for about 20 years, and so I get all sorts of recruitment emails and people trying to recruit me, and some of the language, even at the basic level, excludes women, for example, and stuff like saying ninja developers or the 10x developers. It's just down to the basic language, and I know that we're going to talk about the bigger picture, but even those small things are kind of restricting the kind of people you want to get into the club. It's kind of saying, we don't want you. That's what it says to me. That's on a personal level. So that, and then again, showing that your leadership team, the people who are making the decision, the people on the board are reflective, are gonna maybe have an idea about what it is to live my life, and are going to try and represent me in that company. So that's, yeah.
I think Efwa, that's a really interesting point, because when it comes to recruitment, the thing I was always aware of is, so product and AI are very sexy areas a lot of people want to work in. But the challenge is, like banking in days of old, you're like, oh, you can get a job, but I need 3 years experience before you can get the job. But guess what? Lots of diverse candidates don't have their 3 years experience, for lots of structural reasons. But when I hear people say, I don't get the right talent coming through the door, the responses are, you're not looking in the right places, but you might have to change your criteria. So one thing I did successfully at Babylon was, I was given a role for a mid-level product person. And I split that into 2 roles of two more junior people who had no experience needed. So what I got there was a vastly different set of experience of people applying. It put more pressure on trying to get someone who had the right opportunity and the right kind of abilities to be successful. And that's what I was testing for versus their prior experience of having done the job. But what was interesting is, we got some more diverse candidates in, and I'm not just talking about people of color, I'm talking about people with different lived experiences, neurodiverse, everything else. But then to what other people have said is, we actually had to set up a structure of mentorship, not just with me, but with other product people across the organization, so that the burden of trying to train people up was shared across the organization. But what was interesting is those people who we brought in actually spotted errors, bias, mistake, because everyone has got a group thing. They all come from the same background, the same set of experiences. So it was actually really powerful because it allowed us to think differently about what patients needed. And that's definitely something that's important about getting different people through the door. And then back to what you said about inclusion, empowering them, not in concepts, but saying, here is a way that we're going to empower you by putting a structure in place that you can follow that makes sure that you will not be at a disadvantage moving forward. And actually it's been adopted in other areas of the business now. So I definitely think that's something I'd like to put on the table when people say, I don't get the right candidates. It's like, let's look differently at how we hire them.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Absolutely spot on. I mean, I think I mean, one of the things I wanted to kind of add to this was the sort of idea that, you know, we talk a lot in these sort of circles about creating a place where people can show up as themselves, as it were, and be who they are and be open and able to kind of work in I don't know, the most authentic way or whatever. And I think it's important to flip that over. So to sort of explain why that's important for any kind of minority group that we're talking about. And I just from my own experience as a trans woman, I've found so many circumstances where I've noticed that I am automatically on edge, on guard, if you like, because I know that there are certain places that I'm not welcome. And for an example, I went out for dinner and drinks with some friends a few weeks ago and ended up in this, I think it was a Wetherspoons bar. And I've never felt more uncomfortable in my entire life. Like literally, I thought I was going to be attacked because it was so homogenous, the kind of crowd there. And I felt like if they clock me, then I'm going to get like carried out the door with pitchforks. And I think it's really important to remember that someone like myself or some person of color or even a person of like a different age or, you know, that's maybe not neurotypical or whatever, has that feeling of being, you know, am I welcome here? Is it safe for me here? When they enter a new environment. So you might be interviewing people and you might have, you know, kind of, sort of non-biased interview tactics. But those people walking in the door will pick up on the environment that's there, and I will be very, very aware of how accepting it feels like it is. And that's just to try and explain the mentality or the sort of set situation that requires this. And hopefully that helps kind of bring to life, like, it's not just a nice thing to do, it's a kind of humane thing to do. It's the right thing to do. If you want to build a team that is more effective by being more diverse, then you've got to make sure those people who are on edge and are kind of nervous about whether they're going to be safe in that environment are safe. Because sometimes it seems like, you know, I talk to a lot of people who feel like, oh, inclusive language, it's just such a pain, I've got to use different words, or, you know, those sorts of things. Or they read the Sunday Times and they think that inclusive language means erasing women, right? All of that kind of cynicism is so important to remove from one's culture, to enable the culture to, if you like, embrace different language, embrace a different way of interacting with each other, and make a difference in terms of that sense of acceptance for people. And I think then the next thing that I wanted us to sort of cover was about career progression. So we sort of said, you know, there's a retention element here, and there is a, you know, competitive advantage element here, but how, when you've got your diverse team and so on, like, how do we make sure that we've got, if you like, an environment that mentors, advocates for, and looks after that diverse team? And I know that obviously, Jamie, you've done a fair amount of work on that side of things in terms of, you know, kind of how do you ensure good career progression or equitable career progression for all different people. So would you mind sharing some of your experiences on that one?
Yeah, sure. I think as well, it's important to take your senior leaders on that journey with you. There's no point them not being educated on some of these things, knowing about, going through training around, being an ally when it comes to ethnicity or LGBTQ plus community, so that they can feel comfortable to have those conversations with their teams and feel empowered and not shy away from it. Because I feel like a lot of people want to shy away, as Annette was talking about, those difficult conversations, and it makes people feel uncomfortable. But I think you really need to bring them on board to be able to transform that culture. I think it's really important as well that people who are making those decisions understand their own bias, and when it does come to promotions, that they are aware of what their biases are and how they can eliminate that, so that we can be promoting and getting people stepped up from diverse backgrounds. And I think with senior leaders as well, even if they're not from your community, they should at least try and sponsor different initiatives that are happening within the organization, because that way you have that reverse mentorship. They're learning about a community that they don't know about, and they in turn again can feel more comfortable sharing that or having those conversations with their teams as well. So I think education for me is a really, really big part of that. Rolling out training internally, running workshops, just so that everyone is sort of on a level playing field and everyone has at least that basic understanding of different communities and how they can be as inclusive as possible. So yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jamie. Anyone else want to jump in on that? Because I think we've all, helped mentor teams and grow skill sets.
Yeah, I think some of the important points to mention there are mentorship is absolutely necessary, and it's super important to help women advance. But I think something really special happens when mentors become advocates. And by that, I mean somebody who's actually going to be able to open the door to those kind of opportunities that somebody wouldn't have normally. So that really does involve, as you said, Jamie, somebody in the leadership team really taking on board that somebody who isn't maybe outside of their normal mentorship pool. So yeah, mentors becoming advocates are really something, really when special things happen, I think.
What does that mean in practical terms, Efwa, in terms of a mentor? How does a mentor become an advocate? So I think it's within a company, when your mentor is somebody who's in a higher position and who has the opportunity to put you forward for those roles or speak about you when in a positive way and put you forward, like I said, in the room when you're not there. So somebody has to have. So a mentor is somebody who can support you, and advocate is somebody who can actually put you forward for those kind of positions to help you advance. So they'd have to be in that kind of position of power, hence the senior leadership team have to be on board for that. So that's a kind of difference, I would say. That's quite a courageous thing, I think, in a lot of ways. And my experience with sort of trying to advocate for a kind of allyship mentality within my organization and others, I find there's quite a lot of reticence around it. It's difficult to get people to change their way of thinking to be supportive of somebody else. And I think that's something that's really, really important to work on as part of a culture, as part of your even job descriptions and your guidance for kind of how people interact in a business. I've literally just done job descriptions for my team and kind of thinking through how we create if you like, relationships that are compassionate, regardless of diversity and so on. It's about, being compassionate and understanding someone else's challenges. But then the only layer on top of that is that some people don't necessarily recognize the kind of microaggressions and the kind of difficulties that keep some people back more than others. And training people around that is, I think it's something that's definitely worth considering, so that people who haven't experienced it understand it.
So I think I think that's completely right, because I think there's a HR level and the interpersonal skills that we can only help people great empathy, but then also structurally, some of the work that we can do as leaders is also structural, about how do we stop some of the structural things that are holding people back. And what's interesting is when you think, what processes can we help come up with? So an allyship is interesting because often it can be about getting empathy of different people, but what I found most effective is how to get over that slight awkwardness and creepy feeling when I'm like, oh, there's a racial issue here or a diverse issue here. People are like, oh, I feel a bit I don't know, I don't want to be associated, I feel a bit icky talking about it. I'm like, well, actually, how you can help me is, I know if X, Y, and Z has changed, if we've got a panel of LGBT people to talk about how your healthcare is or isn't working, because I think X, Y, and Z could be improved. You're giving them an actionable task, which allyship means that I need you just to do that. I don't need you to feel sorry for me. And I think that's been a really effective route to get things changed, because as much as empathy is good, what we need is action often. And sometimes the support we can give is helping people at the front line or people who have some ideas, thinking about how that idea can structurally improve the company. It might be a small way, for example, as your experience about, you know, how do we make sure an environment like a pub could be more inclusive and more friendly? You might tell me an idea. My allyship is to help make sure that happens, and how I get people in power, to do that. And I think the second thing is also finding out your levers of power, because it might be one or two people who have got a disproportionate voice, one or two allies who can really help at the senior level, that you use them as your conduit. So you package up a lovely presentation of structured ideas that can fix a problem, give it to them and let them present it, because that's how we affect change often. So I just wanted to kind of bring that as well, because I think I might encourage anyone in the room who's interested to think about those small changes that they could do, or they could motivate others to do, make a big difference for everyone. Yeah,
absolutely. Annette, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think a lot of like the reticence for people to get involved that you mentioned, JJ, could be changed with narrative. So as Randeep said, if you focus on the solving the problem, is like, what benefit is it to me? I know we've spoken a lot about empathy, and I know we've spoken a lot about being good people and diversity and inclusion being the right thing to do. But actually, from a business point of view, it's better in terms of outcomes to focus on business benefit. If we can make our workforce understand the business benefit, the benefit to you, because we are human beings, and we, like, I used to work in marketing, and when we're doing marketing, we always answer the question, what's in it for me? So when you're trying to sell any kind of idea, do any kind of sales, you always have to let that person know, what is the benefit to me? So if we start talking about business benefit rather than empathy is important, but people think of that as they're missing out on something. Somebody else is gaining something that I can't have. If we think of it in terms of win-win, it's easier to get people on board and get people kind of pulling in the right direction for the right reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I 100% agree, and I think I found it something that I think is sort of challenging when you start to kind of say, let's imagine we've got leadership on board, and then we're trying to solve those challenges, and then what we have sort of further down the tree is a kind of part of the audience that doesn't really understand what's going on. And sure, I've actually, I've had discussions whether in my company we should have a sort of code of conduct, which seems a little bit dictatorial, but there's sort of, it's like how do we create language and environment that is accepting and inclusive and is deliberately so, in order to achieve that business benefit. Like once we've got leadership on side, there's quite a lot of actions to deliver that, isn't there? Jamie, I imagine, like, in your role, you've done a lot of that, trying to kind of affect change through a kind of large hierarchy of people.
Yeah, I think being at a bigger organization, it can be really tricky, especially trying to get things passed or policies changed, because then it just gets super complicated. But I think that even if you have the senior leaders, as we're speaking, on board, and you have an action plan, you need to see some form of investment, whether that's actual money being put towards like specific communities and events or initiatives that are happening for those communities, but also just the time from the leaders as well. And I think something with regards to policy, I heard the other day, is that when you try and change policy within organizations, the people who that policy doesn't affect just see it as, oh, it's just another policy. But I think it's really important, as I mentioned before, about that narrative and how we share how it's positively impacting this specific group of people, and then it can take everyone on that journey with them, and they can understand, oh, okay, this makes sense. It's a really great addition to, you know, our policies or whatever. So yeah, I think I'm being as vocal as possible, you know, communicating to the organization, to the employees, making sure that everyone knows where you're at. Yeah.
And I think when we talked the other day, Efwa, you were talking about, you know, setting up organizations or groups within a company can help, if done right, to create a sense of being supported by that business.
Yes, I did. I said that. Yeah, and I think it was pointed out by Annette. I mean, it's important for that team. I absolutely agree, to actually have some power. Also, it has to be an inclusive. The other aspect I was thinking about was that there is also a lot of pressure put on the individuals to be the people who speak out. And I think this is what you mentioned before, and it can't be that way because they are the ones who feel them maybe the least empowered. So having maybe more of a general group as well, where other people, as you said, the allies, can put themselves forward and actually be the ones to take these initiatives forward and also be part of that discussion, is extremely important. So having those groups, yes, so maybe like an association that an individual coming into the company feels comfortable with, but also having other groups who aren't necessarily part of that group to push forward as well and take part and feel part of the decision making.
It's so important. It's something that I feel it viscerally. Before I just want to share a little story, but before I do, I've noticed that there's only 2 things in the chat. Please put questions in, because in a minute we'll jump to the chat and start answering any of your specific questions, because I'm sure there's loads of things that we've not covered that you want to know about. But what I noticed, and Efra's point there is so valid, because what I've noticed is that I came out in my company like a few years ago, and I had to send an email around to like 150 people in the open plan working room, and fearing that they might, you know, come after me and kick me out the building or whatever. And it's not been like that. But despite that, I still have a fear. I'm one of the owners of the business. I'm not an employee per se, so I'm fairly sort of relatively safe in my role. But I am very conscious of the fact that if I did get kicked out for whatever reason, that or, you know, for a kind of because of being trans, then I would really struggle to get another job. Like my chances of getting another job at a similar level are slim to none. The employability for people like me is tiny. So it puts me in a very weak position, and it's a very scary place to be. And when I say, you know, like get kicked out for being trans, that's not something that would ever be literally done. And certainly in my company, that's not going to happen. But things like, you know, things that have been discussed are things like, well, are you going to be okay in front of clients? Are they going to be biased against you because you're trans? You know, those sorts of conversations have existed. And so I sort of exist in this world where, like, if something happens, like there's a microaggression or, you know, I mean, it's amazing that people who knew me before I came out are kind of immediately misogynist towards me. It's kind of bizarre. But to call those things out puts me even more at risk of being, you know, not just an awkward trans person, but a troublemaker as well. And especially seen as a troublemaker because those things, by people who have the privilege of not having to worry about those sorts of things, don't think of as being an issue. So I'm just causing trouble almost for the sake of it, or being overly sensitive, perhaps, as it might be described. So I think that the sort of conversation around having or giving people a support network, you know, whether that's like groups within an organization that say that the organization supports those people and listens to the issues that those people have, whether it be a kind of mentor or a kind of a supportive advocate who can speak on your behalf, or whether it's even just the kind of a compassionate level on a day-to-day basis where there's somebody who isn't at such risk having the courage to call out something that's a really negative comment or something like that. that structure, I think, is pretty important to having or creating that inclusive environment. Without it, you know, someone like me or someone like most of the people in the panel here would struggle to thrive, I suppose is the way of putting it. So that's the sort of last point I wanted to make, really. We're coming, it's, yes, okay, perfect. We're really perfect time. Did anybody want to build on that? I know that was a little bit of a rant from me. Did anybody want to say anything on that topic? No? Okay, cool.
I think, JJ, I think the thing that you said, so I was kind of get off my, yeah, absolutely, because the thing that we forget is, you know, we talk a lot, you hear these words like privilege and power, and the thing that's really important is it's really hard to think, you know, you may not present as someone who is unempowered, but that's the thing about empathy. It's that making structures so you don't have to ask for help. You don't have to ask to be considered. It's part of the DNA of the business that someone would consider how it's inequitable for you to try and have this, you know, how you may feel like you're the first out in a business, or how you may feel certain structures are against you. And that's what's important in this whole conversation, I'd say. Brilliant. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Andy. So let's have a look. Should we have a look at the questions? I'm going to have a look. There's a couple in here, which is great to see. So a question from Aisatu. I'd like to hear thoughts on why you think it's so hard to have diversity maintained in the workplace in the UK, especially considering how beneficial evidence shows it is. Who's going to take that?
I'd like to take that, if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
I love this question because especially when I'm talking about race and ethnicity, the Race Relations Act came out in 1968. And over the years, there's been hundreds, if not thousands, of reports and research and all that stuff talking about experiences of people of colour in the workplace. And there hasn't really been that much change, not really. There's been an influx of the research that we did showed an influx of people of colour hired in the past year since the murder of George Floyd and the resurgence of BLM. But really, in terms of progression, in terms of like leadership, there hasn't really been that much change. And I think that part of it, and research shows this as well, backs it up, is that there's a lot of talk, lots and lots of talk, lots of performative things, lots of groups being set up left, right and centre to appear to fix the problem. But when things get kind of a little bit really uncomfortable, we revert to type. So what I mean by that is if there is, for instance, a complaint, somebody who's really uncomfortable complains about microaggressions or bullying and harassment or some kind of unacceptable behaviour in the workplace, a lot of the times they are made to feel, as you said, JJ, they are pushed out. They're the ones that are made to, they appear to be the problem, rather than the organisation standing by its values and standing by its principles and actually doing something about racism, the horrible word. So I think until we get comfortable with the word, until we get comfortable with more so taking the charge out of the word and just kind of understanding what it is and what it isn't, and getting comfortable with conversations. And if, for instance, somebody was accused of sexism, you wouldn't just fire that person. You would take that person to one side. You would have a conversation with them. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. You can, when you're nurturing a team, nurturing a person, constant feedback is what we do in tech. We should be able to do that same thing with incidents of race. including microaggressions or racism or bullying and harassment. But start with a conversation. Stop being so offended about the use of the word rather than the effect of the act on that person. So until we give policies teeth and actually stand by what they say, nothing's going to change.
Spot
Yeah.
on.
I was going to add to that, Annette. And I think it's about making that grievance process as simple and as easy as possible for people. Because I think a lot of the time people are so scared to bring something up because, oh no, it's going to HR and it's all really serious and they don't know what the repercussions are going to be afterwards. And if you do have that support network in your organization, maybe if it's someone that's not even in the HR team that can have those informal discussions and it doesn't seem as scary and that something's not going to happen. But I definitely think that the organizations need to make it as easy as possible for people to come forward with these types of issues as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yes, that was spot on. I'm sorry if I've mispronounced your name. Aishatu. Did that answer your question? Do you have any other questions? And to anybody else, you know, do you agree with what we're saying? Do you disagree? Is there anything that we've missed out? It'd be really lovely to hear your thoughts. The next question is from Rosie Blow. So, and this is a really good one, actually. We did talk about this the other day and we've missed it. So important to think about the challenge of remote working. So Rosie's asked, do you have any advice on how we make sure that inclusivity is there for remote people as much as people who are in the office? And as someone who's sort of, you know, obviously our company, like, well, every company has gone remote, and from a digital point of view, it's fairly straightforward because from a technical infrastructure point of view, it's fairly straightforward, but from a cultural and emotional point of view, it's very problematic. I feel like the isolation that people feel, especially when stuff goes wrong, can be devastating, and I don't think we fully understand it at the moment. I think there's a lot of challenges, but obviously open up to the panel for their experiences on how we do create that sense of inclusivity from within a remote team. Who wants to take that first? Jamie? Anna? Anyone?
Yeah, I can say a little bit.
You're so polite.
I think, yeah, all the organizations are sort of navigating that hybrid way of working now, you know, making people feel included when they're at home. And I think it's really important to set expectations at the beginning of meetings, or having some ground rules or housekeeping, just to make sure that everyone is aware about everyone that's on the call. You know, when you are in the room, maybe not having side conversations when people are on the call and they don't know what's happening. So I think as long as you're setting those clear boundaries or sort of housekeeping at the beginning of the call, just to make sure everyone, it's front of mind to be as inclusive as possible, then I think that should be done. And
I think another thing, thanks Jamie, another thing to add to about remote working is you forget unless you think about how to include people. So for example, I might be having a meeting and a junior member of the team might spot that I'm having a meeting and ask if I could attend. Or meetings may happen without them, even if they did all the work. On Zoom, it's impossible to see what is actually happening if you're not part of that meeting. So there's lots of the world of invisible work happens in a more profound way on things like Zoom, because people won't even realize what's happening that they're not invited to. So making it clear what events are happening, especially senior leadership or ways of exposing junior team members to senior people in the business, that's a good way of making sure mentorship opportunities happen and people can see stuff. So just be aware of that, kind of making sure everything that's happening is visible, because that's a good way of encouraging, you know, forward progression for many people who are underrepresented.
Superb. Thank you. That's brilliant. Cool. We don't have any more questions on the chat. Does anybody from the audience want to put one in? Thank you. You're welcome, Rosie. I hope that answered your question. So I think we're coming to the end of our time. Hope we've covered a lot of different things. I feel like it's such a big topic that there's a lot we could talk about and go into a lot of specifics. You know, I feel that we've talked about how companies can perform better by having practices and policies and activities that are more diverse, more inclusive, and more equitable. By ensuring representation of diverse talent, by strengthening leadership, accountability, and engagement, by enabling, if you like, equality of opportunity through fairness and transparency, to promote, if you like, openness and a conversation to tackle language like microaggressions, and to foster, if you like, a sense of support across all parts of the diversity spectrum, if you like. So, we talk about race, we talk about gender, we talk about sexuality, all of these things, but there's also age, there's also neurodiversity, there's a whole host of things that it's important to consider, and it's important to get right if you want to have the most effective workplace. So we are coming to the end of our session, and I think actually it'd be quite good to just go round again and just do some closing remarks for everybody on the panel, and just hear your thoughts on wrapping up what we've talked about today, and what you think is an important things for the audience to take away. So I'll start with Randeep.
Oh God, put me on the spot.
Sorry.
I would say the key things are, I think the mix of soft and hard, helping people get empathy, as well as putting structures in place that empower even those who don't feel like they should have a voice or could have a voice, to feel like they're supported. So I think JJ's example is quite powerful, that, I would never see someone like JJ to feel unconfident in situations, but the fact that she does, and the fact that I might, is something that we have to make sure there's powers and structures in place to make sure we keep inclusive and diverse. So that would be my kind of 2 cents worth.
Lovely. Efwa?
Yeah, I totally agree with. I think, again, I hope I don't steal your point, Annette, but that really stood out for me, the thing that you said about the conversation and being so scared of the word racism that you can't, or being called racist, that it's almost not talked about, or it's avoided. That to me has been a key point that I think everybody should be aware of, and the idea that without removing that fear, it's going to be hard for us to progress. I think that has to be talked about, really.
It's such a strong point, and I think one of the things to take into account with these things is, rather than necessarily people feeling that that they personally are branded a racist or whatever, that we understand that maybe their actions are racist or problematic in whatever way. It doesn't mean that you're sort of scarred. You don't have to be scarred for life. We can have a conversation about how you can act differently in the future, because ultimately all of this is about helping mentor people to make a change. So next up, Jamie.
Yeah, I think for me, again, a really important thing is taking the senior leaders with you on that journey. And, even when we're talking about, someone being called a racist, being able to give them or point them in the direction of where they can learn and be better and understand what their biases are. I think that is really, really helpful. And again, getting that buy-in from your senior leaders, whether that be in funding and or, taking them on that journey, getting them to mentor and receive that reverse mentorship. I think that's really, really key.
Spot on. Thanks, Jamie. Annette, closing thoughts?
Thank you. I think for me, 2 things. First of all, narrative, making sure that everybody in the business is clear on why diversity is important, so that there isn't the perception that people are getting things that they don't deserve, or that people are losing out, because that can be quite damaging. So there's that. And then secondly, it would be actions, not words. So, lots of performative actions going on, but is it backed by a budget? Is there a senior leader sponsor? Are there consequences to when things actually go wrong? So actions, not words.
100, absolutely. And I think that it's so easy to talk about these things, but because they're not always easily tangible, it's easy to have actions easy to have words without actions, but it's absolutely vital that we do make changes. And I think everybody's points during the session sort of touched on how one goes about creating an environment that has proactive and positive change, actions for proactive and positive change built into it. And so that's super important. I think I just wanted to sort of finish off. I want to say thank you to everybody on the panel for being here and sharing your amazing experiences. I would love to, if this was actually in a physical, real world and we could all go for a drink and carry on talking about this, that would be the ideal situation. Because there's so many topics that I would love to kind of pick apart and chat about more. Hopefully another time we will get to do that. I'm sure everybody on the panel will be happy for me to say to anybody in the audience, please do reach out if you want to ask us any questions or kind of discuss any topics in more detail. We'd love to, I certainly, and I'm sure everybody else will feel the same, would love to hear from you and help out in whatever way we can. I mean, I think I wanted to sort of finish off with like my closing thought, which is actually like a little story about one of my experiences, which I thought was very, very interesting in this kind of space. It's the reason why I'm on the panel for diversity and equity and inclusion at BIMA. And that is because I go to quite a lot of BIMA events. So they tend to be, you know, kind of roundtable discussion. And back in the day, they were in person, somewhere in London or elsewhere. And I remember going to the first one after I came out, and it was very eye-opening because I noticed something that I hadn't noticed before. I noticed that the group around the table were all white guys, all wearing blue suits, and all coming from exactly the same socioeconomic group, except for me, obviously. And I mean, I come from somewhat similar socioeconomic group, just different presentation, but there we go. And the only women in the room were the people serving breakfast. And I was appalled at that. And I was appalled for two reasons. I was appalled because of the specific situation that we were in and how awkward it made me feel about my contribution to that conversation. But I was also appalled at myself because prior to coming out, when I was presenting as a guy, I didn't notice that that was a problem, that was a thing. I didn't notice that there was an issue with all of that homogeneity because I was part of the problem and I had the privilege of not having to feel awkward ever in a situation. And it hit me like an actual ton of bricks because just a slight paradigm shift to my life meant that suddenly I could see this thing that I didn't realize existed before. And the reason why I'm saying this is because for a lot of people that we are talking to or about, that's their reality. They don't see the challenges that we are talking about and experiencing. And it's very hard, therefore, to understand that they are real, that they are valid, and that they are genuinely affecting people's ability to progress, to be happy, to feel positive and open, and give themselves in the most authentic way to doing great work. And I think that this conversation is so important for those reasons. For people like you all who've come here today to listen to our experiences and really understand that they are real and they are genuinely ones that affect people's careers, and they can affect people's careers in a really, really positive way if we do it right. The other thing I noticed before, without wanting to go on too much, the other thing I noticed is sort of slightly interesting was all of those men in the room had exactly the same opinion on everything. And it was quite telling. And I think when building a team, you don't really want people who have exactly the same opinion on everything. So thinking about how we build a team is so important to creating the best result. So that was my experience, and I think it's certainly the reason why I've got into this space to have these conversations, and hoping that I can change things for people people in the future, that they don't have to sit there and feel awkward, or crucially that maybe when they previously had all the privilege, then they are challenged a little bit and maybe made to feel a little bit awkward, because there are people with different perspectives that we're listening to equally. So thank you everyone for coming along today. I hope you've enjoyed the session. I hope you continue to enjoy the rest of the digital festival in Leeds online or whatever. Don't forget to go and visit or listen in to Annette's talk tomorrow, where there's going to be a ton of data, especially in the region that's relevant to you guys, about this issue. So you actually can start to see what the landscape looks like and maybe understand some of the kind of more tangible things that can be done to make a difference, because ultimately it's about actions, not words. So thank you so much. Thank you to all the panel. Thank you, Randy. Thank you, Efwa. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Annette. And also thank you to the organisers, Wendy and Adam, who have been absolutely amazing at bringing us all here and well, corralling these cats. So thank you so much, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, bye.